Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Post. This is episode number 4 now, and I'm your host, Jeff. With me again is Jason.
Hey.
Hello, Jason. So, we are going to talk today about haunted objects or cursed objects. I know I've been kind of hinting about this earlier in the week, and we're finally doing it. So, um, actually, Jason was the one who picked this topic, so I'm going to turn it over to him for the very first object. It's one that I think a lot of people have heard of. There was a movie based on it. I think you were going to mention the Dibbuk Box a little bit.
Yes, the Dibbuk Box. I'll kind of give a synopsis of what it was.
Okay.
Um, so the box dates back to the Holocaust and a survivor, believing to be possessed by Dybbuk. So the short version of what happens with this box is anybody that comes into possession of the box ends up coming down with some sort of medical condition very shortly after obtaining the box. For an example, the last owner was Jason Haxton. He developed a strange skin disease and supposedly other medical conditions very, very shortly after obtaining the box. And there's more reports of it as well, of people gaining, I say gaining, these strange medical anomalies.
And these are other owners of the box?
Yeah, so let's see. Kevin Manis purchased it, and immediately after he purchased it, he started having terrible nightmares and the people within his house. So he decided to give the cabinet to his mother, who then suffered a stroke literally the day of receiving the box.
Wow.
So the last owner, Jason Haxton, actually worked with a group of rabbis and hid the box from the world. I can't really find anything on what they did with it other than the fact that they hid it from the world, so this could no longer spread to any other people possessing it.
Yeah, you see that sometimes with people who come in and acquire these
So
things.
this is an example of kind of a cursed object.
Yeah.
And the reason it's cursed is because of the anomalies that happen to those who possess it or those who come into contact with it versus um, something that is haunted, which is more of an emotional or spirited possession of an object. And that leads to some ties to another being um, affecting the world around it, per se.
Yeah.
So this would be an example of a cursed object, whereas something along the lines of like the Annabelle doll would be a haunted object. And
Right.
Jeff, I think you have a little experience with this one.
Yeah, so for mine, I picked two of them were pretty well known. There's Robert the Haunted Doll, and there's also Annabelle, which you just mentioned. So, um, you know, kind of like what you were saying with the curses. I mean, I remember we talked about previous to this a chair, the death chair. I can't remember exactly what they called it, but this guy he cursed the chair, and we've talked about the power of intent, and like how I don't know if there's some kind of voodoo curse on it or if it's just like this person. Like I know in witchcraft they believe that in the power of intent, and if you really really want to like curse someone or wish them bad luck or anything like that, like it can actually happen. But then I think in witchcraft they even talk about it how it comes back on you ultimately. So you have to like really wish ill upon these people because you're going to get it back on you yourself. Again, who knows if that's actually true or if it even works. But I do believe in the power of intent, and I think if somebody wants something, and if I think that could be also something to do with prayer, like why prayer has shown some success. Obviously, it's very limited, but there is some success with prayer. It seems like, and it could be those people, just putting out those well wishes or whatever it may be for. So, um,
Right.
and it can work inversely, obviously, with curses. So,
Yeah, the idea that you think positively, you receive positivity. You think negative, the world affects negatively.
yeah, right. And obviously with the prayer thing too, I know there's probably a lot of Christian listeners or viewers or whatever, and it could very well be a god or some sort of deity as well affecting things. Who knows? I mean, um, we just
Yeah.
know that there's something going on. It seems like, or it could just be coincidence. Who knows? Maybe life is all coincidence. um,
Or a simulation.
Right? Yeah, we're living in the Matrix. Um, so okay, so for my stories here or whatever, I want to cover Robert first, and this is like a
Hmm.
little sailor doll, and he actually inspired the Chucky movies, which I think most people are probably fairly familiar with. Even those who haven't seen the movies, actually, they've heard of it, you know. Um,
Yeah.
so this doll was given to Robert Eugene Otto when he was 4 years old. Um, he was given it by a Bohemian girl, not Bohemian, but Bohemian girl, when he was a child. And there are actually theories that this girl cursed the doll before she gave it to him. So eventually he grew up into an eccentric painter, I guess, was kind of his profession, what he became known for. I mean, aside from the doll, obviously. But they called him Gene a lot, so I'm going to refer to him as Gene. He used to blame the doll whenever he got in trouble as a child, too. Like, he'd get in trouble or something, and he'd say, oh, well, Robert did it, you know, or the doll did it. And things like that would continue for a long time, all the way into his adult life. He met a girl named Anne and ended up marrying her. Jean, not the doll, obviously. He moved into his childhood home after marrying her. And then he was even accused of abusing Anne at one point, and he blamed that, you guessed it, on the doll as well. So, lots of weird things going on there. That's kind of a brief overview. Eventually, Jean died, uh, and then Anne hated the doll, so she chose to lease out the home, and she left the doll in the home, and she rented it out under the very specific command that the doll be left alone in the attic to live there, and that was his space. Like people would not go in the attic. So um, she did rent it out to some people, and the people who lived there said they would hear footsteps up in the attic, things moving around, all kinds of stuff like that. So imagine like renting this place and hearing footsteps in the attic and being told by the landlady like, hey, stay out of the attic, this is where this doll lives, and don't mess with it. And yeah, like they would peek up into the attic, I guess, and Robert would be on a completely different side of the attic from where it was before, which is kind of, crazy to think about. um,
Yeah.
and eventually Anne died. It was about 1994 is what it says. They actually donated the doll to the East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. And all this happened in Key West, I believe, is where they all lived anyway. But and this used to be an old fort, like an old Civil War fort, and it was already potentially haunted to begin with, before Robert was even moved there. So, and then the story continues. Workers at the museum claim to hear things, see shadows, and just be generally uncomfortable around Robert or in the place itself. I know the some of the workers, they would announce themselves. They would like, "Hey, we're coming in now. We're starting our shift or whatever," and kind of like making peace with the spirits. I guess I don't know exactly, but they the workers there acknowledged something was going on, and yeah, so it was just a weird place to work. Um, they said that Robert doesn't like to be touched or moved either. Um, Electronic issues, camera issues, lights flickering. All these were pretty common occurrences. People would take pictures of Robert, and the camera wouldn't work right. I know one guy was talking about how he went in. I think he was with PBS or something, and he tried like adjusting Robert's little sailor hat or whatever, and he said that it felt like, when he got close to it, that Robert kind of came alive, like the little black button eyes or whatever. I don't know. And there's been some studies too about like for example, why people are creeped out about clowns. Like it's all about the mask. Like it's a
Yeah.
mask hides our true emotion. Like you don't know what's under the mask, if it's good or bad, or what its intents are. So I mean, anytime, even with Robert's face, it kind of looks like it could be a mask. And so I think, it could be a little bit of us if Robert isn't actually haunted or possessed or whatever. But and he's still there. I mean, once a year they actually move Robert to a different museum. So like they're in town, and whenever he's gone, apparently activity in the fort actually picks up. Like the spirits in the fort don't like Robert being gone. I don't know if they see him as their general or what, but the captain sailor. But activity picks up. Some of the employees have claimed being pushed. Um, there's cats that walk around like yowling really weird, and people have always talked about how they think cats are, connected to that sort of thing, or psychic, or they can sense things. I don't know, but Yeah, so that's the story of Robert, but he's still there. People can go visit him anytime, um,
Right.
take pictures, whatever they want. So, yeah, I don't know. But, Jason, do you have anything to add to that before we move on?
No, that pretty much covers him. I
Yeah.
guess we'll call him a him.
Yeah. 'Cause I feel like some of this is just like storytelling, because some people might not know the actual story behind these things, which is a good lead in to Annabelle. So I know with the horror movies, they actually changed, or movies, I think there's two of them, but
Yeah, there's two, possibly
yeah,
three.
like Annabelle Comes Home or something for the second one. I don't
Yeah.
know. But yeah, so in the movies, they actually changed her appearance a little bit to be a bit more creepy. But in real life, she's literally just a Raggedy Ann doll. I mean, she looks just like every other one.
Yep.
Um, so basically, what happens is this girl named Donna gets an or a Raggedy Ann doll from her mother, that was purchased at a hobby store, basically, in 1970, and they ended up like she was a Donna was a college student, and so she was living with a roommate, and the roommate was named Angie, by the way. And I've got notes here too, just so everyone knows. So that's what I keep glancing over here at, so I'm getting my facts right. Because I know the overall story, I just don't want to be like, oh, this happened, and just kidding, you know.
Yep.
But so over time, things started happening with this doll in the house. It'd be moved in different places, and at first they kind of chalked it up to like, oh, the doll's just been jostled around or something like that. But then occasionally, like they'd come home and it's sitting on the couch or something, you know. And that's something that doesn't just happen. It doesn't just fall off a chair and end up on the couch across the room, you know. So there was that kind of stuff going on. They had, let's see, Lou was the fiance. I don't know if he was a boyfriend at the time, but he didn't like the doll right from the get go. He always got creeped out by it. But eventually, they actually found a piece of parchment paper in the room, and it said "Help me" on it, and "Help us," something like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was. I think it was Help Us.
Yeah, there's been a couple. Like if you listen to the guy who runs the museum now, from Ed and Lorraine Warren, I think he's the son-in-law. He specifically said it said "help me," but then I found a couple articles that said it said "help us" or "help them," something like that. Um,
Yeah, I've read Help Us, and that it had fresh drops of blood with it, I believe.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. So they found that, and it was weird too because it's parchment paper. You know, like not many people around then had parchment paper. Um, so they naturally they just chalked it up to like somebody playing a prank or something like that. So they started putting like scotch tape on the door frame to see if people were coming into their apartment and like messing with stuff. And you know, eventually things kept happening, and they consulted a psychic, which is always a good idea, you know. uh, you know, because then you can really get some confusion going on. Um, so after finding the doll on Donna's bed with some red liquid on its hands, which could have been blood or maybe not, who knows? But that's when they decided, you know, to contact the psychic, and the psychic told them basically the doll was inhabited by the spirit of Annabelle Higgins, a 7-year-old girl who had been found dead in the field where the apartment complex was built on. So we kind of got like the classic like Native American burial ground kind of scenario going on, except this was just an empty field, I guess. Um, so with these two girls, they were, I believe they were nurses or going to school to be nurses, and so they were kind of like the nurturing type already, and they agreed to let Annabelle stay with them. So that's when things started to get bad. Um, so Lou, he started having bad dreams. He was the fiance of Donna, I believe. Um, so he had one dream where Annabelle was actually climbing up his leg and climbing up onto his chest and was strangling him with her little doll hands. And so, from the outside perspective, this is actually kind of funny looking. If you can imagine a little Raggedy Ann doll with her little paws, like just choking him out. But you know, I could imagine in the dream it would be pretty creepy. I don't know. I don't know how big her hands were. You know, like maybe they could wrap around or something. I'm not sure. But so this was going on. He woke up from the dream, told the girls. They all kind of freaked out. But yeah, so he worried about the girls after that as well. So a few days later, he and Angie, the roommate, were hanging out, planning a road trip, um, and they heard someone moving around in Donna's room. So they didn't know if it was a break-in or what was going on. So they looked in there, and Annabelle was off the bed and sitting in a corner of the room. Um, so this obviously was pretty weird. Let's see. And then he approached the doll, and he was consumed with this feeling of like a burning, and he ended up having like scratches on him, I guess, and they healed like abnormally quickly. So I believe like the son-in-law again from Ed and Lorraine Warren, he was saying that I don't know if that picked that up on the microphone. Loud
Just a hair.
motorcycles on the yeah, that's nice. Which actually fits into the story later on. So hold on. So apparently, like I said, the son-in-law he described it as a psychic attack or a psychic scratch, which is why they healed so quickly. Um, so that happened, and they ended up calling in a priest and all this stuff, and then Ed Warren showed up, and he ended up taking the doll with him. And there were a couple instances where he said that it actually levitated off of his desk, which is pretty crazy. I'm trying to imagine like a Raggedy Ann doll like levitating up in the air right in front of you. He called in the priest as well, and he had a priest look at it, and apparently something came over this priest, and he ran up to the doll and picked it up and literally threw it across the room, and it was like, God is more powerful than you, or something like that. And Ed was like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you throwing it across the room?" And so they did that. And then apparently the pastor was driving home, and I think he was doing like 65 or something. I don't know, miles per hour. And I don't know why I specified that. And he rear-ended a tractor trailer or something. So he got in a car accident. It didn't kill him. He wasn't seriously hurt or anything like that. But he said that right before it happened, he looked up in the rearview mirror and saw the doll, like Annabelle. And I believe that scene was in the movie. So that was a weird thing. And it is odd, too, like, you would think that if he was making it up, well, you wouldn't think he's making it up. Would he really crash his car into the back of a tractor trailer just to blame a doll? Like,
Yeah,
so that,
a little far-fetched.
Yeah, so that makes me think on that a little bit more seriously. And then, later on, I mean, the doll is still there. It's in Ed and Lorraine Warren's museum. And it's still there to this day. They also have a story where they claim, and this is where the motorcycle comes in, they claim that a young man, it was actually a couple, I guess, and they came in and visited the doll. And the man was kind of a skeptic, and he came up and he pounded on the glass and was like, "Why don't you scratch me? And there's nothing to this, and it's not actually haunted." And then apparently, on their drive home, the girl that was with him said that he looked back at her while they were driving and kind of joked like, "Oh, that doll was nothing, see?" And then like he swerved and apparently he hit a tree and he died on the motorcycle. So this almost seems a little too perfect, like he just happened to mention the doll and then the crash, and it almost sounds like a fabricated story, but who knows. I tried to find some information on the guy. I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find a name or anything like that. They just say a young man. So it's really hard to verify that story. It probably could be done. I don't know if it was exaggerated or not, but that is one of the stories. So
Yeah.
but like I said, again, this doll is there to this day. You can go visit it. And again, too, the only thing to worry about is that with both of these stories, these are large tourist attractions. So any of these stories could have been exaggerated for publicity, for tourism, for, profit, basically.
Right.
So,
But that's any story, not even just for the publicity part. It's essentially a telephone game. You tell a story to enough people, and eventually the story changes. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse.
yeah, absolutely. And again, too, like, even though I'm saying that it's for publicity, that doesn't necessarily make it invalid. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. That doesn't mean that the dolls aren't haunted, that, like, they could easily still be haunted. And people are just, making a buck off of it, as bad as that sounds. But, I guess if they are haunted, it is definitely better that they're in a museum rather than tormenting some private home. I mean, Robert, as far as I know, never murdered anyone, like in the Chucky movies. So obviously that was just a light inspiration. But, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to think about these. Um, I read on both of them today in the same day, so I kind of was able to compare them a little bit closer. Like, it's one of those deals where I've always known about these stories, but when you see them side by side, um, as far as I know, these are the two most prevalent stories as far as like haunted dolls. I know there's a few more out there. Um, I don't really know what to think about it though. I mean, the jury's still out. I saw one guy on YouTube who claimed to debunk the Annabelle story or debunk the haunted doll, but he didn't have anything to debunk it. He's just like, oh well, it's kind of like the clown face thing I mentioned about having a mask on. It's like, well, people just get creeped out when they look at things, and it's like, well, that's not really debunking anything. That's just saying people get creeped out when seeing certain things. So
Yeah, you're basically debunking it by saying that people cause their own misfortune,
yeah, basically,
basically, which we do and we don't, but that doesn't mean that there's no possibility of any form of afterlife, such as these dolls, that plays some tie into the, I guess you call it living world.
yeah, yeah. Um, I don't know. I mean, if so kind of like you and I have talked about privately, it's like to discuss a doll being haunted, we have to presuppose that ghosts are real or that there is an existence after this life. And so,
Right.
I mean, I guess that's one of the prerequisites if you want to believe in these haunted dolls. Though, I mean, you could consider it like a non-human entity, like the Annabelle doll. That's probably not a 7-year-old girl who died in the prairie. That's not what
Yeah,
a 7-year-old girl would do. Not murder, blood, letter. So I don't know.
yeah. I wouldn't say that it is a 7-year-old girl that is doing that. Um, I mean, if we're going with the logic of a 7-year-old, their getting even would be taking something, pushing another kid over, childish things, not necessarily, you know, murder, physical violence, and such.
Yeah. I mean, most 6 or 7-year-olds are lucky if they're fairly cognizant in Minecraft. Like that's about the level that we're talking about here. So, um,
Right.
I don't know. I don't even know if I could pilot it. Like, if I was haunting a doll, if I could pilot a doll and murder someone, like that's a feat in itself. So, or at
Right.
least
You'd have to be
attempt.
a pretty angry, spiteful individual to begin with. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, a lot of that you fall into the rabbit hole of ghosts, spirits, poltergeists, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So,
So,
I mean, even if we went and visited Robert the doll, I don't think we would walk away with any conclusive evidence one way or the other. Like he's not going to hop down out of the case and come say hi. Um,
right. I mean, let's just say you and I went together, and you experienced something, but I don't.
yeah,
Is it a wash at that point?
yeah. It's like even if I was like, oh man, I feel kind of creeped out. That doesn't mean anything. Like you could see a toy on the ground, and if it's a weird looking toy, it could creep you out. It doesn't matter if it's completely innocent or haunted. So,
Right.
but so I mean, bottom line, jury's still out on that one. I'm not here to debunk anything, but I think they're fun stories, and so I want to bring them up. And speaking of fun stories, I have one more, and this one is kind of goofy. Uh, Haunted bunk beds. So,
Yes.
uh, yeah, I dig it. So this is the story of the Tallman bunk beds. Tallman was the last name of the family.
Yes.
So the Tallman family lived in a house that had no history of any hauntings that they were aware of anyway. They lived in Horicon, Wisconsin, a small farming town of just 3,800 people. Um, and they moved in April 13th of 1986. So in February of 87, Alan and Deborah, or Debbie Tallman, uh, they brought home a bunk bed they purchased at a secondhand shop. They assembled the bed and stored it in the basement. So I believe it was in May. Yeah, in May they brought it upstairs. I don't know why they kept it in the basement for so long. I guess they didn't need it or something. But so they brought it up, and the children, who almost never got sick, apparently got really sick after that for no real reason, except haunted bunk beds. So the kids got sick, and they had a Danny is what we're calling him, who slept in a room next to where the bunk beds were, I guess. After they brought it up there, his clock radio apparently took on a life of its own. It started turning on and off by itself.
Yes.
It would change channels under its own power. He saw the radio's vindicator moving by itself,
Right.
but his parents didn't believe him, which is fairly normal. I mean, a lot of times, if a kid comes to their parents and is like, hey, this happened, my pillow floated off the bed, they're not going to believe them typically.
No, there's monsters in the closet.
Yeah, right. So, so apparently, when the youngest daughter was sleeping in the bunk bed, she claimed she had seen a red-eyed witch standing behind her door. She claimed that she saw a fire in her room as well, and a month later, Danny actually ends up seeing the same thing. So, I don't know if she could have told him. I mean, obviously, he probably knew about it. Like I doubt it was kept a secret. But that does not mean it didn't happen, and it's not true. So, I just want to clarify that. I don't know why I'm trying to skepticism analyze this myself, but anyway, so they ended up bringing the family pastor in, and he felt a presence of evil inside the house, is what they said. So they kept being tormented by entities. Sorry, I don't know why I said enemies. I guess they would be that as well, though. Doors would bang open and shut. Strange voices would call out of nowhere. Ghostly visions, things like that. Right before Christmas, Danny saw the same horrifying vision about, was it the fire? No, I think it was just something. They don't really specify in the story. Frustrated, Alan told the spirits to get out of his house, and he said if they wanted to fight someone, they could fight him. So Alan, the father figure, taking charge here. So
Against bunk beds.
Yeah, yeah. So then 3 weeks later, around 2 a.m. on January 7th, 1988, Alan returned home from his work. Outside the garage, he heard an eerie howling sound and went to investigate. A voice came out of nowhere and said, come here. So he went around back to see if anyone was there, but there was no one. He went back to the garage and saw it was on fire. He ran inside to grab a fire extinguisher, obviously, that's what you would do, and he came back and the fire was gone. So apparently...
Everybody's
fire.
seeing the fire now.
Yeah. So, let's see. So the garage had no damage, no visible signs of distress or fire at all. When he got back inside, his lunch pail had been set down, and he had set his lunch pail down because he just got home from work, right? But then when he got back to it, I guess it had been thrown across the room. So the entity was like, screw your lunch, and tossed it across the room. So
the entity, the bunk beds.
Right, yeah, or whatever spirit haunted the bunk beds. So yeah, and also another thing that happened, I didn't feel like it was worth writing down, but I mean, since we're on it, apparently there's one point too where Alan is painting a room, and he walks out of the room, and then he comes back later, and the paintbrush is set handle down into the paint bucket with the bristles standing up. So Jason, I know you could probably that'd be really irritating, wouldn't it? Like as because you're kind of in the maintenance field, so you would know, like, oh gosh, my good paintbrush, Home Depot.
Not even that. It's just I can't paint anymore now.
Yeah.
The handle's painted, so I have to.
Yeah.
I have to clean the whole thing.
So again, I didn't think that was really a scary thing, but it is kind of funny just at how annoying that would be, I guess.
Yes.
So anyway, this all proceeded along. Alan started sleeping in his daughter's room to provide protection. Then one night, a fog appeared around him. A voice came out of the fog that said, "You're dead." So things escalated a little bit here. And so Debbie called and told the pastor about what happened. A few days later, Alan was working late and asked the relative to watch the girls. His relative was a complete skeptic until that night. The same horrible figure seen by the children appeared, and he let out a loud scream. I think when they're talking about the figure, it's probably the witch with the red eyes that was behind the door
that's
or
what
whatever.
I'm assuming as well.
Yeah. And so, let's see, they decided to leave. 2 weeks later, though, they had the bunk beds destroyed, and they had no more paranormal experiences after that. So, fairly simple solution, I guess, just destroy the bunk bed. But yeah, in April of 1988, a family moved into the Tallmans' old home and had no haunting experiences. So, to me, that indicates that it was not the house that was haunted, not the property, not the location, but the bunk beds. Typically, I have heard of cases where people, like Amityville, which I don't know if there are probably a lot of people who disagree with this, but I don't think Amityville was ever haunted. I think it was a complete fabrication. I mean, they actually had discussions over wine of, you know, making that whole thing up and making it a hoax. I've actually talked about this on a different podcast, The Fright Corner, which used to be a horror movie review podcast, and we went into detail on that, talking about how, like, the people who lived there, they actually had wine late one night and had discussions about literally fabricating a story about an Amityville haunting. So, yeah. But anyway, I digress. I'm getting off on a tangent here. Basically, the property could have been haunted, and it's just like whatever family was there didn't activate it, I guess, or whatever. So who knows? But again, I think it was the bunk beds probably. Usually you can't just destroy it and everything goes back to normal though. Usually you would think that would make it angry or whatever, because it's like when a ghost haunts a house and you do renovations on a house, usually that'll stir up the activity because you're changing what they know. You're changing their original existence in a way. And so, you know, usually that kicks up the activity. And so you would think if you took bunk beds and destroyed them, I don't know. Again, I'm assuming that this is a legit haunting and these bunk beds really were haunted. I don't know. It sounds goofy, but I mean, typically anything could be haunted, you know, whether it's a locket or a house or, you know, graveyard, whatever. So anyway, that's pretty much my stories for this episode. Hopefully you all kind of enjoyed it. Jason, did you have any closing thoughts on all this craziness?
I want to ask your opinion on the validity of any of these existence, whether it be a cursed object or a haunted object. What do you believe or not believe could happen? Is the possibility of cursed objects or magic, if you will, versus the hauntings? Have you experienced anything? Because I know you've kind of dabbled in the search, we'll call it.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done a few investigations and whatnot. Just paranormal investigations of a house. There were a couple of houses I've checked out in the past. One hotel in Colorado Springs is actually where I've had my one and only, like, true ghost sighting, I guess. And as time goes by, you know, you become skeptical of yourself even. But yeah, I have had the one encounter. I think it was a shadow person or shadow entity, which does not seem to be what they had here in the bunk bed haunting, obviously. Shadowed entities are more observers than, like, actual, like, move stuff around and throw things and scare people kind of deal. So on the whole,
Spirits
anyway.
lost between the worlds.
Yeah. We don't, I say we, like, back at the home base, we, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's definitely possible. You know, you've got anything from poltergeists who, like, throw things around. They typically show up in homes that are usually more emotionally unstable, which is interesting in itself, because then you almost wonder if it has something to do with like hormones, and from people, like, maybe you're accessing part of your brain that allows you to do, like, telekinesis and throw things and whatnot. Who knows? It's hard to say, but there's so many possibilities. I definitely don't throw it away, though. I think there could be something to it, obviously. And again, like I said, I believe in the power of intent, at least to some extent. I believe that curses could definitely be a real thing, which is pretty unfortunate. Like, you know, voodoo and everything else. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. Again, you have to have a certain amount of evidence. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof and all that stuff. But still, sometimes things happen whether you have proof or not. You know, like, I don't know. People get sick whether there's proof or not. So,
Sure.
I don't know. But it's fascinating, and we're always on the search for it. You know, we're always trying to find out. That's kind of why I started this podcast, and, you know, what kind of keeps you interested as well, I think. It's just, like, we want to know the truth, whether there are ghosts or there aren't ghosts, or curses are real or not, you know, like,
Yeah.
just, you know.
Or even the idea behind it, for those that do believe or don't believe, you know, what brings them to that side of the fence.
Yeah. So, I don't know, but we're going to keep going. We've got definitely more stories, you know, lined up. I don't know what next week's topic is going to be yet, but we'll come up with something. I kind of want to talk about leprechauns. I don't know how everyone feels about that. I'm going to put out some feelers on social media, so keep an eye out for that.
I'd love to do leprechauns just because I only know of the silly TV shows or the that horror film Leprechaun, and
Yeah,
that's all I know.
yeah. They, man, they build their roads around leprechaun areas. You know, like if there's a like there's some places where they have like little mounds that they think could be either homes or leprechaun burial areas, and their roads literally go around them. Like they preserve the area. So
Yeah,
like
I think that would be a fun one.
yeah, like we can laugh at it over here as Americans, but I mean they believe in it, you know, and I think there's a good chance Bigfoot exists, and people laugh at me all the time. So I mean I'm down with it.
Right.
So who knows? But
You have to have fun.
yeah. So anyway, thank you all again for listening or watching on YouTube. We're available there, and we're on iTunes as well now, iTunes podcasts. So we should be available just about everywhere at this point. So please check us out, tell your friends, and thanks for listening.
Have a good one, guys.